Your Britain every Monday 5 p.m. UK time on your #1 entertainment channel, Kanshi TV Sky Channel 772, broadcasting to 180 countries around the globe. One of the highest rated programs being watched at this particular moment on Kanshi TV. Yes, where we discuss issues affecting and reflecting all our communities here in the UK and right across the globe. And for that reason, there is no change. As always, we have a special guest in the studio, and I promise you I've got a special guest in the studio with me, a very, very special guest. He'll be delighted to speak to you, but just before I introduce him, let me remind you, if you've missed this evening's program, you can of course watch a repeat show every Friday 2 p.m. UK time, and then you've got the social media websites. You've got Kanshi TV's website, you've got Facebook, you've got YouTube and many other social media channels where you can watch this program again. Right, very briefly, this evening's program is regarding the elections which are taking place on the 6th of May 2021. That's right, on the 6th of May 2021 we have two elections. We have the Police Crime Commissioner elections, and we also have the Metro Mayor elections which are taking place. And if you remember, last week we had the candidate for the Police Crime Commissioner, John Hunt, who represented the Liberal Democrats, and this evening we have a very special guest who's also a candidate for the Police Crime Commissioner from the Labour Party, Simon Foster. And next week, no, I'm sorry, I beg your pardon, not next week, on the 5th of April, we have the Tory party, the Conservative Party candidate, Jay, who will be here, and of course, all three candidates are, of course, fighting to win this election on the basis, on the grounds of supporting all our communities right across the West Midlands. As you know, West Midlands, there are many issues within the West Midlands. But just before I officially introduce you to my guest, I have to give you some facts and figures. And right, in Birmingham, this is according to Birmingham Mail now, we have approximately 14 knife crimes a day taking place in the West Midlands. These are some very brief facts which I'm giving you, and figures which I'm giving you. Of course, I have many stats and figures, but due to time I can't go through every single one. But I believe it's very important to also highlight these to other police commissioner candidates, so they know exactly what's going on. I'm sure they know what's going on, but it's my duty to highlight these. Also, and of course alarm bells should be ringing when you've got 14 knife crimes taking place a day. And on the other hand, we also have approximately 21 stabbings in Birmingham in 2020. Again, Birmingham has the 72nd highest crime rate in the country. Yes, you've heard me right. I'm just particularly talking about Birmingham now. I'm not talking about the West Midlands. So these figures should be alarming for all these three candidates. I believe there may be other independent candidates, and also from the Green Party, which I'm sure if there are, you will see them on your screens shortly in the next coming weeks or so. But let me just take you back to some of the figures when it comes to crime rate, and these are per area now, so per area, per rate. If we look in the West Midlands, approximately, if we look in Walsall, we've got 83.27. If we look in Sandwell, these are crime rates I'm referring to now. In Sandwell, we've got 87.29. In Wolverhampton, we've got 94.81. And in Birmingham, which is the highest, is 97.75. Absolutely right, you've heard me right, 97.75. These are the crime rates which are taking place. And also, according to the Guardian newspaper, the headlines, the title is "City has become unsafe." These are some of the mainstream newspaper channels, newspapers and TV channels which I'm referring my stats and figures to. And also from the Standard, almost inevitable rise in violence. So these are some of the figures which I felt were very important to highlight to you. And also, very briefly, let me highlight some more figures to you from the UK crime stats now. This is going back December 2021. Very briefly, just for your knowledge and information, ABS 3,982, burglaries 1,008, robberies 615, vehicle crimes 2,257, violence 12,650, shoplifting 1,392, drugs 543, weapons 367, public order 2385. These approximately add up to 29,950 just in December. I'm referring to 2020. So there's approximately 30,000 crimes just within that sort of realm, and now I'm referring to the whole of the UK. So I'm sorry if I've, these are some of the figures which were very important for me to mention to you. I know that we have to take all these into consideration. Right, now just before I introduce my guest, let me also remind you the phone lines are open on 08000. This is a live program broadcast, 886404. Once again, 08000 886404. And my sincere apologies in advance. I'm not going to be able to take all the calls, so you can also email us. You can use the text services and many other ways of contacting us. I promise you, your questions will come forward to me. I can't promise I will ask every single question, but I will try my level best. We only have approximately 1 hour for this program. Right, okay, so let me officially introduce our guest, our very respectable guest, Simon Foster, who is the Police Crime Commissioner candidate for the Labour Party. Welcome to Your Britain and welcome to Kanshi TV, sir.
Thank you very much, Shahzad. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you very much for the opportunity and the invitation to appear on Your Britain, which is a wonderful community-based channel on Kanshi TV. And good afternoon both to you and good afternoon to all of your viewers as well. It's great to be here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Simon. As you've heard, Simon, in my introduction, I have gone through some facts and figures. Of course, it's going to be very difficult now to sort of mention. I've got many more figures, but due to time we can't do that. But very generally speaking, you're standing for this election, which is taking place on the 6th of May, I believe, 2021. What is the reasons? What is the main reason why you're standing for this election?
The main reasons I'm standing for this election, Shahzad, is that for the past 35 years, I've been a legal aid solicitor. I've lived and worked and brought my family up in the West Midlands for the past 35 years. My family's roots are in the Black Country. Mm-hmm. I have worked in the community as a solicitor, providing advice and representation to members of the local community. I've worked in private practice. I've been a partner in a legal aid law firm. And I'm absolutely passionate about access to justice, equality before the law and the rule of law. And I think that I've got the relevant skills, knowledge and experience to make a difference in this role. I'm passionate about local democratic accountability. I think this role is a fantastic opportunity to work with the police on key issues around justice and home affairs. And I've had 35 years practical and professional experience of holding public bodies to account on behalf of the people. And at the end of the day, we've got to remember that the role of the Police and Crime Commissioner is to represent the people, not, of course, the police. You have to work with the police, of course you do, but it's about representing the people, it's about democratic accountability, and it's about making sure that the voice of the people is heard when it comes to ensuring that we have an effective and efficient police service on behalf of the people of the West Midlands.
Mr. Foster, many people are watching this program, and there are millions around the world, particularly in the UK. As I mentioned, 180 countries are watching this program, and of course they also watch the repeats and on social media as well. First and foremost, we've had a police crime commissioner here in the West Midlands, and I was privileged. I had the honour to even interview him last year and a half ago, David Jemson, a great individual when it comes to personality and character, but when it comes to profession as a police and crime commissioner, he's done a great job. Many will agree, many will not agree, but many will also state this, that why should we vote and support another Labour Party candidate who's standing for Police and Crime Commissioner, where I have given you figures of the crime rates, where I've also given you figures of you know, the national media giving figures about the stabbings and the knife crimes and so on. And also, let me just remind you, according to the Express and Star, going back in July 2020, West Midlands knife crime, the second highest in the country after London, nearly 3,500 offences. And also, let me bring this to your attention, the violent crimes rate in Birmingham 40% higher than the average national average, 40% higher. Now, many would say, well, hold on, we've had a police crime commissioner who belonged to the Labour Party. Approximately he's been in power for a term and a half, I believe so. Why are these crime rates so high in the West Midlands? Why should they once again put their faith and trust in yourself belonging to the same political party when we got all these rates which are shocking and you know, extremely high rates at this particular moment?
Yeah, they are shocking, absolutely, Shahzad. But let me put that in some context in terms of the difficult circumstances in which policing, not only in the West Midlands, but across the entire of the country. And I have to say that, you know, those statistics are shocking, but they're not limited to the West Midlands, of course. There are similar statistics in London, in Manchester, in Yorkshire, and other parts around the country, of course. And I'm sure you would acknowledge that. There's been a very difficult context within which West Midlands Police has had to be operating in the past 10 years. In the past 10 years, the Conservative governments over the past 10 years have cut the West Midlands Police budget by £175 million. They cut 2,221 of our police officers. That was 25% of our police officers have been lost between 2010 and 2018. We lost about 700 or 800 essential police staff. That included 300 police and community support officers. Community policing has been absolutely dismantled over that 10-year period. Back in 2010, we had about 1,800 community police officers in the West Midlands. By 2018, we had half of that, about 700. So plainly, as a consequence of that, that's going to make a difference in terms of the ability of West Midlands Police to be able to fight and tackle crime in the West Midlands. I might add as well that in addition to that, we've had cuts to essential preventative public services during that period of time. So we've had cuts to youth services of about 70%. We've had cuts to mental health services. We've had cuts to drug and alcohol addiction services. The consequence of that is, the impact of that is that the police service have ended up having to pick up the pieces and the consequences of that, inevitably. And I would thirdly add that unfortunately the current Conservative government have at every turn undermined our criminal justice system. They closed 295 of our courts across the country. We've got prosecution rates now down to 7%. What that means is that only 7% of police recorded crime actually results in formal action at the moment. They disastrously privatised the probation service that cost the taxpayer about £480 million. And the state of our prisons at the moment is such that offenders that get imprisoned come out without any lack of meaningful rehabilitation, which means that the whole cycle repeats itself again. So that's the context in which we've been dealing. Now, I would say, notwithstanding that, West Midlands Police have actually been performing a heroic task. Within that context, they've had to do more for less. They've been overworked and underfunded, and consequently you have those crime stats. Now what I would do, I can come on to tell you the difference that I would make, but go ahead.
Right, as I said to you, you've mentioned some of the cuts from the Conservative Party. They've been in power for approximately 10 years or so, but at the same time many would argue that the money that's been funded, that's been pumped into the system in millions from central government, there's no doubt about that. Many viewers who will be listening to this will be also stating that money has been given to local policing, although there's been some cuts, we totally, I don't think that anybody out there will disagree with that point, but money has only been spent and money is also being pumped into the system. As I said, I don't want to go too much into facts and figures, otherwise we're going to be here all day talking about how many millions have been pumped in the system and how many millions have been gone out of the system. So basically, I don't really want to go down that route and down that line. But a message from yourself is very clear. Due to cuts, obviously, we have to, the budget has been tightened. But again, many people would also say that we were left with a huge bill going back 10 years when the Tories took over from the Labour Party and we were paying their debts off. So there can be many arguments when it comes to, what's been cut and what's not been cut and why it's been cut. So as I says to you, we will try to stay on the main focus, which is what is your first priority if you're elected, God willing, on the 6th of May. What is your main first priority, which viewers will love to listen and hear? What will you do to make a big difference in our communities right across the West Midlands?
Yeah, thanks, Shahzad. I agree with you about facts and figures, but you did start the interview with a with a big long list of facts and figures. To be fair, I only thought it was fair to balance it up.
Absolutely, you've done a great job balancing it.
In all fairness, and I would only just say that those decisions that I've just related to were political choices at the end of the day.
Of course.
The Conservative government led the retreat from justice, and they abandoned communities by imposing those cuts. But anyway, what difference would I make as a police and crime commissioner?
Of course, well, that's what people want to hear.
Absolutely, and that's what I'm here for. But what I would say is that what I want to do is to reinstate the infrastructure around community policing. I want to rebuild community policing in the West Midlands. It's been dismantled over the past 10 years. We need to rebuild it. I think that was a big mistake. It was counterproductive. It was a false economy. I believe that the people of the West Midlands want to see community policing rebuilt. It's about policing by consent. It's about making sure that the police are the public are the police. It's about visible, proactive community policing. And my number one task will be to rebuild community policing throughout the West Midlands, because I think of all that we could do, and there are a lot of big tasks for any police and crime commissioner, whoever gets elected, but if there was one thing that could be done that would make the biggest difference, it would be to rebuild community policing, and that would be my job in the event that I get elected as the police and crime commissioner. Mr.
Foster, as I said in my intro, there are very big issues when it comes to racism within the force. You probably have seen this on social media, you've probably heard about this within the police force. So I want to talk a bit about that, and then we can move on to some of the crimes. But just before we do that, a couple of months back, there was a viral video which was on social media. I think almost everybody in the country has probably seen that video, where a police officer, this is just one incident, I can mention so many hate and crime incidents, but due to time I will only mention this one, which really affected myself as well, where I've seen a police officer pinning a young child at the age of 14, 15 against a wall in Newtown, and treating him just like some sort of football, punching him around. That must stop immediately, regardless whether it's in the West Midlands or whether it's anywhere across the United Kingdom. We do not stand for any of that. So people are feeling at this particular moment that the police force is racism in a way. In terms of stop and search, there's another issue which I will be talking to you after a few minutes. But at this moment, do you believe that there is racism within the force? And if there is, and if you believe, and I don't think anybody's naive not to believe that, but if there is, what is going to be your first step soon as you take office, God willing, if you're elected? What is going to be your first step to sort out the racism issue, which is impacting millions of people within our communities?
We know that that racism exists within our society. And just as it exists in society, it exists, no doubt, within the police service. It exists in our health service, it exists in education, it exists in housing, it exists in the workplace. We know this. And policing and the criminal justice system indeed are no different in that sense. Now, what I would say is that we have to make sure that we challenge and eradicate any bias, disproportionality, discrimination and racism from within society. It's completely unacceptable in wider society, it's completely unacceptable in health, in education, in the workplace, and of course it's completely unacceptable in a police service and in the wider criminal justice system. And so my position in relation to that is that there's no negotiation over that. We have to ensure that we challenge and eradicate those issues because at the end of the day we need to eliminate discrimination and we need to promote equality of opportunity for all, irrespective of their background or anything else.
If that's the case, many would ask, how would you then engage with the local communities? Because at this particular moment, when somebody, even if it's just a general politician, when they're elected, it's very difficult to get time off them, and due to their schedule, it's understandable. But people will then turn around and say, when it was time for elections, we were seeing all our candidates knocking the doors day and night, but now we need them. We have to go through certain channels, maybe 10 different people, for example, and then at the end of the day, we still might not get to the police commissioner, or we might not get to the MP, or we might not get to the councillor. How would you engage, if you're elected, how would you engage with the local community, i.e. would you be seeing them on a monthly basis? Would you be going to Wolverhampton on, say, once in a month? Would you be going Dudley once a month? Would you be coming to Birmingham so people can physically knock your door and say, right, we need to speak to you face to face, rather than going through 10 different people and then contacting you? What would you say about that?
Yeah,
engagement.
Engagement, absolutely. I think that's a fantastic question.
And people will hold you
absolutely
for your answer.
That's a fantastic question, and it's important because, of course, the role of the Police and Crime Commissioner is democratically elected by and are directly accountable to the people. So you have to be held to account by the people who elect you. And certainly from my point of view, I would never take anybody's vote for granted, ever. It's absolutely fundamental. You have to earn people's vote at the end of the day. What I've said is that I have always said this, I want to be a people and communities Police and Crime Commissioner. Excellent. Now, what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is at the very forefront of the role has to be engaging with, listening to and working with the people, communities and regions of the West Midlands. Now, as you know, Shahzad, the West Midlands is a big place.
Of course it is, of course, yeah.
It's a pretty
it's
huge,
a big circle. It's a big circle.
It's a huge geographical location, and I mean there's about 3 million people. So, you know, in reality, you're not going to get out and meet
every single one.
Every single individual. Even if I wanted to, it's not going to be physically possible.
Okay.
So how can we maximise engagement? That's the so how can we see as many people as possible that actually want to see me?
Correct.
Now then, what I would say is there's a number of ways we can do that. Number one, I think community surgeries is definitely something I would be interested in establishing around the West Midlands to begin with. So that would be an opportunity to meet and perhaps come and question the Police and Crime Commissioner. Directly, exactly, number one. Number two, community walkabouts. I think that's a way of being visible in people's communities.
Excellent.
And engaging with people, coming out to the different areas around the West Midlands and being seen about and being accessible, because I think that's really important. And thirdly, another idea that I'm interested in pursuing would be area panels. Now that would again be a way of promoting community engagement, and in one sense, in terms of how those area panels would operate, I'm kind of open to discussion about that, because in one sense, if they're the people's area panels, then in one, you know, the people need to have a say in how they operate. It's no good me just telling them
what to do. Yes,
this is how it's going to be, and this is what I've set up. You know, it needs to be a two-way process. But you're absolutely right. Community engagement is absolutely key to this. You know, I don't see the role as being sat behind a desk in Lloyd House. You're democratically elected, you're directly accountable to the people. And I would just say, I do believe that I am the only candidate from the main political parties who actually believes in a democratically elected and directly accountable police and crime commissioner, because I think some of the other candidates want to abolish people's right to vote, and they want to abolish the role of the police and crime commissioner. I will oppose any steps to abolish the democratically elected and directly accountable role of the police and crime commissioner, because I believe in the people's right to vote.
Mr. Foster, you're absolutely right. There are other candidates who I've interviewed, and I will be interviewing in the next coming weeks, who've absolutely made it clear that these positions should be abolished. There's no two ways about that, and they've given their reasons, and I'm sure people have seen those programs. Last week there was a program, and there's many more programs to come in the coming future.
Of course.
Right, okay. But let the audience be the judge of that. Right.
Absolutely.
So we just want to move one step forward, is basically the crimes, which are obviously at a very high rate. There's no two ways about that. Some are due to what's happening, COVID-19. That hasn't helped anybody, to be honest with you. That's one of the reasons. But even before that, going back 4, 5, 6, 7 years, crime rates are going throughout the roof on yearly basis. The main one is, which I was privileged to invite David Jameson at that particular time, there was a very highlighted story about particular children taking knives into schools, and I'm referring to secondary schools, and we had to do an awareness program for parents and for schools and so on. And at that time there were many recommendations which were put forward to David, and one was, because we all got children, I've got children, and I want them to be safe. I want everybody's children to be safe. And there's a culture of gang crime within secondary schools, within inner cities. I'm not saying all, but there are certain schools where you have these crimes taking place. Now, one thing I recommended at that time as well, and many of the viewers who called in said that there should be some sort of metal detectors at schools, which in the morning when children go in, or in the afternoon, or whenever they're coming in and out of the premises, they should be going through these metal detectors that there are no knives that they are carrying. Now, unfortunately, nothing has been done since I've spoken to Jamie, which is about a year and a half ago. No action has been taken, not that I'm aware of. If there is, then of course that's fine, but as far as my understanding is, there was nothing that took place at that time. Now, this is something which is really affecting millions of parents across the West Midlands. If you're elected, what would you do about knife crime, particular knife crime when it comes to young children?
Yeah, knife crime, Shahzad, is a huge concern to me. I am committed to working tirelessly to address this epidemic across not only the West Midlands, let's face it, it's across the country.
Of course.
But we need to get a grip on this. Now, there's a number of ways that we can do that. Firstly, I do think that, yes, we need robust detection and enforcement. Of course we do. But that in and of itself is not going to solve the problem. We know that. We're not going to arrest our way out of the problem of knife crime. It's more complex than that. I mean, remember that no single case is the same, and this is a complex issue. There are many different levels to it. But what I would say is, this is what I would do to tackle knife crime. Number one, reinstate community policing. I think that's absolutely essential in terms of visibility, in terms of proactive policing, in terms of problem solving. If you get community policing right, you get a lot of other things right. That's number one. I think that's absolutely key. Secondly, we've got to work together. And this isn't a matter that's entirely within the gift of a police and crime commissioner, of course. But a police and crime commissioner can work with other statutory bodies, with other third sector bodies, with the Metro Mayor, of course, to rebuild youth services in the West Midlands. That's absolutely key. Youth services have been decimated throughout the country. West Midlands has disproportionately suffered as a consequence of that. We've had cuts of about 70-odd% to youth services within the West Midlands, and I think we've been paying the price for that. But thirdly, we need to deal with school exclusions, because we do not want vulnerable children out of school. We need to keep them in education. We need to address statutory safeguarding, particularly in relation to vulnerable children who've been in care, for example, or who've suffered some other type of trauma. That's absolutely key.
Of course.
Next, we have to invest in the Violence Reduction Unit. And we have to pursue a public health approach to this. So what's what's a public health approach? Well, a public health approach is saying it's no good just dealing with the symptoms.
Of course.
You've got to deal with prevention,
yeah.
early intervention,
Yeah.
and the underlying causes of this. Because unless you get a grip of that, simply dealing with the detection and enforcement aspect of it is not going to solve the problem. And then finally, Shahzad, what I would do is we have to make sure that this is a team effort. It's, the police cannot solve this
matters on their own.
It's a
community.
It's a community. Well, it is the community. You're absolutely right. It's got to involve the community, but it's got to involve our schools. It's got to involve our health service. It's got to involve local authorities. It's got to involve social services, the third sector, and youth workers and so on. Because it's only by working together. Shahzad,
that we can come to
that we can prevent knife crime. We can protect our young people, and we can. Most importantly, Shahzad, we can save lives.
Right, and linking on to that, for that reason, the West Midlands Force now wants to employ approximately another 3,000 officers, enrolment. But the issue here is not just opening the applications for everybody to apply. The issue when we conducted this program, my production team, we've had many questionnaires, we've spoken to people randomly, is when people apply, they do not go to the second, third, fourth stage. Their applications are withdrawn for whatever reason. I don't know that. For whatever reason, the applications are not going ahead. Maybe due to BAME community, that the police is not accepting applications from the BAME community, which I will be talking to you in a few seconds. But at this moment, 3,000 officers are being recruited approximately, but the applications are not being processed to the next stages. What would you say about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult for me to comment on individual cases because I don't know the full facts of those particular individual cases that you might have in mind. But as a general principle, you're absolutely right. In order to achieve the net uplift of 1,200 police officers that we need to recruit by 2023, well, I would just say, of course, those 1,200 police officers are not going to replace the 2,221 police officers we lost, which I think, it's welcome, but it's not a great deal for the West Midlands. If I had my way, we'd be getting all of our 2,221 police officers back by 2023, not just 50% of them. But anyway, from my point of view, representation is absolutely key. I've made no secret of the fact that I want a police service that is representative of the communities it serves. That's absolutely key. We're living in the West Midlands in 2021. It's not 1921.
You see, Mr. Foster, if I can just give you these very brief Home Office figures. Approximately, we've got 1 in 12. I'm talking about the BAME officers at the moment who belong to the BAME community. For many people who don't know what if I'm referring to BAME, I mean the African, Jamaican, the Asian community, Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi. So we name it as the BAME community. Right, 1 in 12. But technically speaking, expectations should be a lot more than that, shouldn't they?
Shahzad,
probably 5 in 1 or probably more than that.
Shahzad,
but at the moment, we've only got 1 in 12, sir.
Absolutely, Shahzad. You're absolutely bang on. Approximately within the West Midlands, the Black, Asian, and minority ethnic community, the BAME community, as you say, they make up about 30% of the population of the West Midlands. But in terms of police officers, there's only about 14%, I think, of our police officers are from Black, Asian, minority ethnic communities.
Now 18%, sir. Of 17 to 18, depending.
Well, I don't know if that. I'm not sure if that figure might count for police officers and police staff.
Yeah, complete.
Yes,
18%.
that may well be the
complete.
The aggregated figure. Yes, but police officers a bit lower than that. Okay. Now, back in 2014, it was 8%.
Okay.
by 2020, it's about 14% police officers.
Okay.
So it has improved, but it's not good enough. I think the numbers are a little bit better when you look at police staff, for example, PCSOs, but again, it's not good enough. And I do believe that in the recent cohort of police officers that have been recruited in the past 12 months, it's about 23%. So it is getting better, but we need to do better. Because, as I say, fundamentally we need, and this comes back to policing by consent, Shahzad, because we say in this country, don't we, that we police by consent.
Of course.
Now, it seems to me that it's a precondition of policing by consent that we have a police service that is representative of the communities that it serves. So
why do you believe for that reason then? Let me
just say this, Shahzad. I know David Jameson has committed that of the 2,800 police officers we now need to recruit between now and 2023, he set a target to West Midlands Police that we recruit 1,000 of those 2,800 from black, Asian and minority ethnic communities. Now, I completely support that target, and in the event that I'm elected, I'm committed to delivering on it.
So let me ask you this, many people would say, if that's the case, why has the recruitment of the ethnic minorities been so poor, so far been so poor? So what's the reason for that then?
This is an endemic problem, Shahzad.
And how can it be improved, basically?
I don't know if you're of a certain age, Shahzad, as I am, but
I'm getting there slowly.
But I remember the Scarman report in 1981.
I was going to refer you to that one, yes, okay.
Now, Scarman, back in 1981, that's a long time ago, he said vigorous action was required to ensure that we had a police service represented the community. Now, that was 1981. We didn't make anywhere near the progress we made. In 1999, Macpherson said very similar things. He echoed what Scarman had said. He said that the progress towards having a police service represented the communities it polices was inadequate. He set targets, none of them were kept. Now, when the Home Affairs Select Committee reported in 2016, and I'd recommend having a look at that, they said in words that the efforts to ensure a police service represented the community, they said it was pitiful and woeful in terms of the progress. Okay, now some would say that as a consequence of the static recruitment that's been taking place over the last 10 years, as a consequence of the cuts imposed by the Conservative government, as a consequence of that, it's been difficult to make progress over it, and an opportunity has presented itself as a consequence of the current uplift, and so it's definitely the intention that we're going to improve on that, and we're going to make sure that progress is made around representation for black, Asian and minority ethnic members of the community in terms of them becoming part of the police service.
Right, Simon, I'm going to, as I said, the phone lines are chock-a-block at the moment. The producer is saying the phone lines are chock-a-block, and I've got approximately another 5 or 6 very important questions now. I don't know whether we should go ahead with the phone lines or whether we should continue with our questions, which are more important, I believe, at this particular moment for me to ask you, and then we'll go.
Shahzad, you're my host.
Yeah, I'm your host. You're in my hands,
hands.
absolutely, and you're all safe if you're in my hands, so don't you worry about that. Right, okay. Right, viewers, I promise you, if I can get through a few more questions, I will be taking your calls. I've got emails coming in, I've got text messages coming in. Okay, right, let's carry on with the next question, which is very important. Now, to reduce crime, Mr. Foster, many people have suggested that face technology should be used. You know, face recognition I'm talking about, where you can recognize the Do you believe that's taking it one step too far, if that is introduced?
Yeah, I think as you say, you're talking about using facial recognition.
The police, where the police should be allowed to...
Facial recognition technology.
Money to the public, basically.
In principle, obviously, we want to use technology. We want to move into the 21st century, and if we can use technology in order to fight and tackle crime, in order to reduce crime, in order to reduce victims, in order to reduce, the impact on public services and so on, then of course, in principle, we should. What I would say though is that we do need to make sure that the appropriate safeguards are always in place when we're using technology, because we do need to make sure that we're protecting people's rights and freedoms as well. Now, interestingly enough, the work that South Wales Police was doing in relation to facial recognition technology was actually declared unlawful in terms of the approach, the specific approach that they'd adopted down in South Wales. There was a decision of the Court of Appeal, which is the second highest court in the country, last summer I think it was, and effectively what they said was that the way that South Wales Police were using facial recognition technology breached data protection, and it also breached the public sector equality duty. And they said it was disproportionate in terms of the way they're using it. So yes, of course, we should be using technology, but we've got to make sure we do it in the right way. We've got to make sure it protects the rights and freedoms of people. Now, interestingly, the West Midlands Police do have a groundbreaking, pioneering ethics panel in the West Midlands at the moment. And West Midlands Police and the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner are working very closely on this in order to make sure that we get this right and we get as much of the benefit from technology as we possibly can. And it's obviously essential we do that. Right,
I'm going to keep these questions very short, and I'm sure the answers will be short as well. I have to get through a few, and we've only got a few minutes left. We've got a text message from one of the callers, and he's referring to the cameras which were set up mainly in the Asian-dominated areas. A couple of years back, you remember there were big cameras, recordings on the main lamppost and so on. For whatever reason they were up there, I think some of the West Midlands Police, the terrorism unit, and many other units were setting these cameras up. People are very upset about that, particularly the ethnic minorities, because these were set in mainly dominated Asian areas. If you're elected, would this ever be repeated again, or do you believe that this should never be the case of recording people just the way we see Big Brother all the time, watching them or what's going on? And that was a question from one of the viewers in the name of Mr. Akhlak.
Okay. I mean, if I'm thinking of the circumstances in which he is thinking of the same ones, I think these were cameras that were put up quite some years ago, wasn't it?
A couple of years back, yeah.
Yeah, I think it might have been a few more than a couple of years. It might have been.
There were cameras basically due to terrorist activities and many other activities which were set up. So basically, his question is, if you're elected, would you repeat that?
Well, I certainly opposed the placing of those cameras up in various areas within Birmingham at the time. I didn't think that the consultation that had taken place was appropriate with local communities. I don't think there'd been adequate communication and engagement, and I think there was a lot of misunderstanding that was generated. And I think, sadly, there was an element of loss of trust and confidence in those circumstances. Now, I don't want to prejudge the circumstances that may arise at some time in the future. We have to. We have to look at each and every case as it happens. But I don't think it was done. But I don't think it was done the right way those few years ago. And of course, I might add, the cameras were ultimately taken down. So it was effectively accepted by local authorities and by the police that they hadn't got it right over that.
Okay, my friend, I hope you've got your answer and you're satisfied with that. Right, now we're going to be talking a bit about domestic abuse, particularly in the last year or so due to COVID, but even before that, that's something which is on the rise, Mr. Foster. And now I'm not just talking about domestic abuse where it takes places with women only, I'm talking about men only. The only difference is certain men don't have the encouragement of sadly, coming out with the abuse that takes place due to being a man naturally. That's the way it is. But of course, with the stats and figures I've got, in some stats and figures, we have more men who are victims of domestic abuse rather than women. But at the same time, whether it's men or women, the question is, how well are you going to support domestic abuse victims if you're elected?
Yep, okay. You want me to be relatively quick on this?
We only have approximately 7 minutes, and I've got approximately 3 or 4 questions, so I want to try to get through to as many questions as I possibly can.
I'll answer it in a minute or so. What I would just say is, number one, Violence against women and girls and domestic abuse, as you say, whether that is in relation to women or men, is going to be an absolute priority for me in my police and crime plan. Okay? The existence of domestic abuse is an absolute scourge in society. I think it has catastrophic and devastating consequences for the victims. We need to make sure that the police are using all of the tools available to them in order to make sure that victims are safe. And what I mean by that is bail conditions, domestic violence protection orders and notices, restraining orders, using all the tools that are available to them. We've got to make sure that victims are protected, okay? I'm also interested in making sure that we roll out independent domestic violence advocates in order to support victims navigating the system, because it can be very intimidating for victims having to deal with that. There's lots more to be said on that, but that's a little snapshot.
Absolutely fine. Let me just go one step further. Stop and search, Mr. Foster, has been a big issue here in the West Midlands. Of course, it's been in London as well, but you know, you're standing in West Midlands, where certain communities are feeling threatened by the police, the way sometimes the police are treating these communities, particularly I'm referring to the youngsters now, maybe 16, 17 and so on, probably even younger than that, to be honest with you, and they feel that they've been targeted by the police, and for that reason they feel that they, that they're in this vicious circles, that because the police is deliberately targeting them, although they haven't done nothing, or they feel they haven't done anything wrong in terms of crime, but when the police targets them, they feel that if we haven't done nothing, we have been targeting, why don't we, by all means, go and do something and then be a victim, or then, so they've got this mentality that the police is indirectly forcing us of becoming criminals. What would you say about that particular stop and search in the BAME community?
Yeah, okay. Well, look, stop and search is undoubtedly a way to fight and tackle crime. It's a necessary power in order to deal effectively with crime. Number one, but it always has to be carried out proportionately, lawfully, accountably, transparently, on an evidence-based way and intelligence-led. And it has to be open to scrutiny, okay? Democratic scrutiny. And that's why we need to make sure we have area scrutiny panels so that members of the community can hold the police to account in the way that they operate those powers. I mean, remember that it is a very powerful invasive power. Consequently, wearing my lawyer's hat here, if there are powerful invasive powers, then they have to be subject to an equivalent level of scrutiny. Of course, that's the thing. Okay, so yes, stop and search, but the other thing is the police will say it's an effective way of taking weapons off the street. The actual academic evidence itself suggests that as to how effective it is as a deterrent is not very strong. It's quite weak and inconsistent in terms of the overall evidence as to how effective it is. And of course, as you quite rightly say, Shahzad, there are members of communities around the West Midlands who feel that they are sometimes victimised as a consequence of the use of stop and search. And I have to say that when that happens, of course, the risk is that it can be counterproductive and that it can undermine trust and confidence within those communities. Now, that can often have, as I say, counterproductive outcomes. So we need the power, but we need to make sure it's used in a necessary, proportionate and accountable way.
And for that reason, we have another a concern from another viewer who is saying the attitude of the police and the tone that they speak to individuals, particularly in the BAME community, is just unacceptable. I have been a citizen of this country for over 60 years, and sometimes when I see the police dealing with particular communities, it's unbelievable and unacceptable. So that was another viewer.
What I would say, yeah, I mean, what I would say is that, I mean,
i.e., is there any training, or if you're elected, God willing, would you be emphasising this on the whole force of taking it one step back and easy?
I mean, I have no doubt that the vast majority of police officers are dedicated, conscientious and professional in the way that they conduct themselves in their as police officers. Okay, number one. Now, if there are examples of police officers behaving in a disrespectful way and discourteously, then that is unacceptable. Okay, that is unacceptable, and plainly they should be held to account for their behaviour, because there's no excuse for behaving in a rude, discourteous and disrespectful manner. You can exercise your powers in a way that doesn't involve you having to do that. But as I say, I have no doubt that the vast majority of police officers are dedicated, professional and conscientious in terms of the way that they conduct themselves.
Right, okay, I believe I've just been told by my producer we only have 2 minutes. I think it's a minute for you and a minute for myself. Viewers, you've heard Simon Foster, the PCC candidate for the Labour Party for the elections which are taking place on 6th of May. Unfortunately, I would love to go on. I have many more questions. I'm really apologise. I couldn't take your calls due to time, but I have still many questions, and I promise you, if he's elected, we'll be definitely coming back on Your Britain, and in fact, he will be coming back constantly, every couple of months to update you on what's going on within the police force in the West Midlands, and also, anything new that's happening within the force and so on. I promise you, Simon will be here on many more occasions. So Simon, your final message to the community for 6th of May. Why should they elect you? Why should you be elected? You've explained your priority. You've made it very clear why you're standing for this election and what is your main priorities, particularly your priority number one. You have approximately 20 seconds or so. That's all we have, sir.
Okay, Shahzad, well, it's been a pleasure being here, and thank you so much for all of those of you who listened. I've always said I want to be a People and Communities Commissioner. That means engaging with, listening to and working with communities. My priorities are going to be community policing. We need to fight for fair funding in the West Midlands. We need a Labour Police and Crime Commissioner who's going to hold this government to account for the effects on communities throughout the West Midlands. I will always invest in prevention, because the prevention of crime is always better than having to deal with the consequences of crime. I will make sure that we have justice, safety and security for all of our people, communities and regions of the West Midlands. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Simon Foster. Thank you very much for watching Your Britain. See you same time, same place next week, Monday 5 p.m. UK time, and don't forget to watch the repeat show